All right, my name's Mitch. For those who don't know me, I'm the pastor here at Converge Community, and so grateful to be with you here again. And as Jake already mentioned, we're in this Form series, and we've been in it for a few weeks now. And the very first talk was about our mission here at Converge. This is an old mission, but newer language. We're kind of getting that clarity so that we can talk about it more easily, more easily to our friends. And so I had a little quiz for you, and if you were paying attention, you've already heard it once, but do you guys remember what the mission is, what the mission statement is? It was quiet. So you got the missional map over here, our kind of strategy, engage, encounter, equip, our mission statement, engaging people with purpose, right? And so we talked about how Jesus was regularly engaging people with purpose, not just in an outward sense, like we're going to talk about, is also training up his disciples, developing them, and leading people towards worship. And how we live this out is in that strategy, that mode, engage, encounter, equip. These are the things that I said, if you're a part of Converge, this is what I really want everybody involved in. Engaging people with purpose. That we're talking about engaging people who are outside of the church, who are far from church, loving them practically, doing things for them, but also loving them, having conversations with them, helping them understand what we believe about Jesus. And then encountering, and we talked about that. We want every person encountering God regularly. And so that's obviously this space, corporate worship, doing that together. And this is the one place in that I say I really want to encourage you guys to be here as much as you're able, because all the other things we're saying we do, it doesn't necessarily necessitate you coming to church all the time. In fact, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But we also want you guys encountering God on your own. It's a bit of a pet peeve of mine as a pastor, but when I hear people saying, oh, like, we need the church to do this for us, we need the church to do that for us, and what I really want to hear is, what are you doing to meet with God regularly on your own? So there's a piece of that encounter that's building our connection with the Lord, regularly talking and walking with the Lord on our own, and that last one, equip, and we're really serious about that, developing not just future Jesus followers, but future leaders in the faith. People who can equip another, who can equip another, who can equip another. This generational approach to discipleship. So that's what we're asking you, 3 things you're part of in this bigger idea, engaging people with purpose. And last week, Jake talked about our first value, these values we've been formed on, and that one is fun philosophy, how it's not just a strategy, realizing people are busy, people prioritize their time accordingly, and so if it doesn't fall within the top, level of their priority system, they're probably not going to do it. And so part of our approach is doing things that are fun, that people will hopefully want to join in on it with us. But it's not just a strategy for engaging people, it's also a part of our spiritual health, as Jake alluded to that last week, and how this is a piece of us that play is a form of spiritual rest. Making sure, I had a mentor in my life for many years. He would always ask me, are you getting out and playing? Because he knows it's so tied to that spiritual health. And so much of that fun philosophy is tied into our spiritual health, as well as Jake talked about discovering that joy inside of you. And today we're going to live into that outward focus, the next value. There's not necessarily a ranking order. We just did this, formed the acronym, so it was easier for all of us to remember. This is the second one in that acronym, outward focus, and that really lives in a big way to that mission statement, like we talked about, engaging people with purpose. But as we also mentioned, that's not just outward. A big part of engaging people is the things we do in huddle, getting together and challenging, encouraging each other, developing each other in our own journeys of faith. But this one specifically, we're going to lean in to the outward part of this. And I'm not going to lie, as I was preparing, I was saying this is actually a tougher message than I thought. And it's not because I don't talk about this all the time. You guys know that. It was because I talk about it all the time that I'm just like, what am I going to say that's even that much different than a couple weeks ago. So you'll have to bear with me on this and where we're going in that. But that is really the big idea today, because Converge, I want us to be outward focused so ultimately more people can be upward focused. That's the hope. That's the call. That's what Jesus came into this earth, onto this earth to do. And you guys have seen this verse before, John 3:16 and 17, that really summarizes this well. It says, for God so loved the world, he gave his only Son, his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn it, but to save the world through him. Jesus' whole purpose of being incarnated as fully God, fully man, we're going to celebrate this in just over a month, if you can believe it. We're almost there to Christmas. Jesus' whole purpose was to come on this missional adventure to save the world. Because from the very beginning, God has had his intentions to have this intimate, close relationship with every human being. This was the start, the Garden of Eden, where you see Adam and Eve walking with the Lord in the cool of the garden. And of course, you guys probably know how that story ends. It doesn't end so well. They sin against God. There's a severing of that relationship and that condition. They're cast out of the garden, and perpetually there's this problem of our distance from God. And throughout history, he tries to remedy this and restore our position back with him. And we see this go on and on and on. And one of them that's really memorable in Genesis 12, 1 through 4, this is when the Lord calls Abram, who becomes Abraham, and he says, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I'll make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I'll make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. This is incredible to me, where there's other stories that we're kind of jumping past in the Old Testament, but we see this pattern of humans' waywardness and God intervening to try to restore that relationship again. And I love this one. He calls an old man, 75 years old, to be the father of the future, of the nations, that he's going to use him to bless them. He sets them on this trip across the land, so to speak, a cross-country trip, so that he could be a blessing, so that he could help restore this position, this relationship, God's people with God once again. And as you know, as you probably may know, these cycles don't end. There's periods of obedience, and people are really connecting with God, and really bad periods of waywardness. And this is where you see the prophets, the different prophets in the Bible. So often they're coming in proclaiming to the people, you have to return to the Lord. You have to repent. You have to look back to God. In fact, Isaiah, you may have heard of him, the very first chapter of Isaiah, he's speaking and he says this, "Hear me, you heavens, listen, earth." So this is Isaiah speaking to the Hebrew people. He says, "For the Lord has spoken," and the Lord says this, "I reared children and brought them up, but they have rebelled against me." Isaiah is calling out God's people, saying, you have to turn back. You have to return. God tries to do this over and over and over, and ultimately it just keeps failing. People keep failing. Humans keep failing, and this is what led to Jesus' intervention. This is when God said, you know what? Probably went something like this. You guys are a bunch of idiots. I need, if you can't do the job right, do it yourself, right? And so God himself, 3 in 1, Jesus, the Son, is incarnated, becomes fully God, is already fully God, but becomes fully man as well. And this is incredible because he's not just a source of redemption for humanity and restoring that relationship, But the nice upside of this is that he actually models how we should live. Because it didn't matter how good the prophets of old were, they were still imperfect. And there were imperfect things that happened all the time with these spiritual leaders. Jesus not only came to restore our relationship with the Lord through his perfect life and his sacrificial death and his resurrection, but he also showed us this is how you are to live. And what did he intend to do? Let's read that again, John 3:16 and 17. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Jesus was sent here to bring restoration, redemption to the world. Jesus came to this earth on a mission to bring everybody back to him, to the Father. This was his one goal. Did he do other things? Absolutely. Like I just mentioned, he showed us what that life should look like. He showed us how to train people effectively. He showed people how to pray and all these different sort of skills or aptitudes. But his big goal was to bring restoration for God's people back. His mission was outward focused. Jesus was outward focused so that many more could be upward focused. And I don't want you guys to lose sight of that, because this is the piece of that where I think so often, because he does so much, it's really easy to forget his one primary goal was to help people come back to him, come back to the Lord. That was his number one mission. In seminary, they would call that a missional hermeneutic. How do you study the word? You study it understanding everything God was trying to do was missional, restoring his people back to him from day one. And when you read the Bible like that, it will open your eyes. And it was incredible when a professor showed me that. I'm like, whoa, you're actually right. Because I've thought about it as sometimes like a manual for living or some of these other things that we kind of use it for our own purposes, but it was always meant to be for others. It was always meant so that other people could experience, know, and glorify God himself. So again, this is something that I've been beating the door on, the drum all along. This is not a new word to you, but I did want to read this because this is one of Jesus's close legacy carriers who changed the trajectory of Christianity and the church, and that's Paul says to the Roman church in Romans 10. He says this. He said, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. How then can they call on the one they have not believed in? How can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can anyone preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. See, Paul deeply understood this principle and lived it out. I mean, this is a guy who was regularly leading people to faith in Jesus Christ. He was a guy who was regularly training pastors in the next generation of leaders. He was a guy regularly starting new churches all over Europe and Asia Minor. And he understood that the whole goal was so that other people could know and experience Jesus and find that restoration, to be restored back to God himself. And we, as Converge, ultimately that should be our goal. That should be a church's, not just our churches, but every church's goal to help as many people as possible experience restoration back to Jesus. So we talked about this a couple weeks ago and how Jesus did this. Remember in Luke 4 and 5, we walked through that and the different ways he was doing it. But ultimately, Jesus did two things. He spoke or taught, preached, whatever you want to call it. There was this proclamation aspect of this outward focus. There was also a healing or restorative piece where he was healing people, attending to needs, those sort of things. This is how we also should live out this outward focus. Are we talking about our faith? Are we talking about what Jesus has done in our lives? Because so often Jesus would say, go tell them what you've seen. It's not real rocket science. Like, you don't have to be a theologian for that. Just tell them what you've seen. Just tell them what God has done in your life. And then the other piece, heal. He says, go and heal. How can we be an agent of healing and restoration in people's lives? So we hear that. We talked about that last week, but still it begs the question, why does the average church at 15 years old plateau? Why does it stop growing and at about 20 years starts declining? Is it because people aren't going to church? Is it because people have left the faith? No. It's because that church has moved from an outward focus that originally started them, and now whatever it is, whether it's programs, whether it's just the closeness of the people, all the eyes have moved inward. And now all of a sudden, your effectiveness, you're not living out that mandate to Paul, where he's saying, how will they believe if they haven't heard, and how will they hear if someone's not preaching to them? This is what happens with the 15-year-old church all too often, is they don't hear about these things anymore. They don't talk about them, and people in their sphere, maybe there's not many unchurched people in their world anymore, and if there is, are they not talking about their faith? Are they not living out this mandate, this act of love that we see Jesus modeled himself? So this is why we do church planting. This is why we want to keep planting churches, because I never want us to be that 15-year-old church that looks in and forgets, but there's a real risk of that happening. This is why we want to keep planting churches, keep that fire hot, that spiritual zeal going for Jesus, and you do that by starting these new churches. And you guys have probably heard me talk about this, but there are so many statistics to back how new churches lead to exponentially more faith changes, faith experiences, conversions. And this is what Jesus came, is so that all people could be restored, all people could know him, and ultimately we live this outward focus again, so other people can be upward focused, so more people will know Jesus. So we talk about this problem of the church, and again, it could be programs, it could be this or that keeps the church from doing it, but there's also an individual aspect to this. The church is made up of a bunch of individuals, and why does a church plateau at 15 years so often? It's because individuals aren't living this out in the church, and corporately, it's not happening anymore. And what's the problem? Why do individuals stop living out this outward focus? I think it's the very opposite of the phrase. It's inward focus. We become self-centered. We start thinking about all the things we have and goals we want, and a lot of these things aren't even bad, right? Like, I'm not condemning these things. The problem is the outward focus in our lives, the selflessness, is so much easier to lose. If we're called to live a balanced spiritual life with this outward kind of selfless focus, this inward developmental caring for the people, and this upward really worshiping, those two, the inward and the upward, tend to be the easier ones to keep engaged with. It's the outward one that so easily just gets left off. And again, this is why churches ultimately start plateauing. And so for us, we have to say, what would be the thing that would keep us as individuals from becoming too inward focused? And that is looking at our lives and saying, how do we set our priorities now? What are the things that kind of trump things that shouldn't be? And this happens with me all the time. People, whether I'm working on a talk or whether I'm doing something around my own house, and somebody expresses they have some kind of need, and I think, I should probably help them, but I'm too busy. I'm not going to do it. I can't tell you how many times that happened. I know once in a while I don't do that, and that's great, but it's so easy to be like, no, I just have too many things to do. And part of this comes from ultimately a lack of trust in the resources God's given us. So maybe we think, somebody asks for something, we say, I don't have the money for that. Or somebody asks for our time. I don't have the time for that. We're believing this subtle lie that says there's a finite amount of resources, and if I use it for this, God will not provide it otherwise. And therefore, we act selfishly. We become inward focused and not outward focused. And not only does the individual, honestly, really prone to that just in our humanity, our brokenness. We talk about Adam and Eve in the garden. What happened? It was an inward focus. They wanted the fruit. They wanted God's view. That was ultimately their demise. This is the hardest thing for us to get over, to be outward focused, to maintain our outward focus, is get over ourselves. And Jesus himself said, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Even Jesus, the Lord of the universe, came not to be served, but to serve. And quite frankly, he's the only person that would actually have a good excuse for saying, now you should serve me, if he's God. And he is. But he's saying, I did not come to be served, but to serve. Again, setting that example, living out this outward focus, living out this missional hermeneutic, this missional perspective in everything he does. So we can't continue to ignore people around us that may need to experience Jesus through us. We have to keep our eyes open. We have to trust God with the resources he's given us. And again, I'm not advocating that we live this spiritually unbalanced life where you give up all your time and you don't connect with Jesus, or you give up all your time and you're not taking good care of your family. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we have to live balanced, and this outward peace is not only the peace that's so easy for us to lose in our own lives, it's the easiest one as a church to lose. This is why churches generally plateau and start declining after 15 years. And this is something I refuse for us to be. And if we make it 15 years and we're still growing, hallelujah. And if we plateau, this will be the point I say, I think we're done here. And we better split up and start a couple more churches that are ready to grow, ready to reach, ready to impact people for the kingdom. Another thing you might even be saying is like, well, Mitch, it's all good. We want to be outward focused. We want to help people. But if they really want to know Jesus, don't they already kind of have all the tools they need to know Jesus? It's not as if we're in some foreign country where Christianity isn't talked about, Jesus isn't talked about. And I would say partially that's true. Partially that's true. They probably have at least, at minimum, the accessibility to information about Jesus. But as many of you have experienced your own self, or you have with friends, sometimes the biggest adversary to the faith is the church. Because we do, or somebody else does something that hurts and offends and breaks. And you might be, like Paul is talking about here, you might be the one voice that they will actually hear. And that voice will not be, these are all the reasons Christianity is right and you're wrong. That voice will be a voice of love, a voice of compassion, and a voice of understanding as somebody who knows them better than anybody else does and can actually help them see what would Jesus do for them. How would he not just give them eternal salvation, but how would he benefit their lives here and now? And you're that voice. And so while they might have access to that information, while they may have heard about Jesus, they don't know Jesus like you've experienced Jesus, and you're the one they trust to tell you. And this is why we emphasize so often these hangouts and even huddles to connect with people outside of the church. One thing I think is intriguing, Walmart, they're, I don't even know how big of the company is. It's obviously massive. I was just looking for some statistics, because one of the things the church I'm interested in, I'm amazed by, is the church, like a lot of other organizations, be content with kind of the people, the gathering they have. Like it's that tribal mentality. I got my tribe, that's all I need. The church does that a lot. Walmart, this massive company, they spent $3.2 billion in advertising last year. You guys understand how much a billion is? It's like 1,000 millions. It's a lot. It's hard to imagine $3.2 billion. They spend it on marketing alone. This is a company that could easily say, well, everybody knows about us. I mean, literally, like you could, I've been to other countries and there's Walmarts, like people know about us. We could probably get away with spending $1 billion on advertising this year. They believe it's so important to spend $3.2 billion so people are reminded, and they believe in what they're doing. It's not all about money. They believe in what they're doing, and so they want other people to know. How much more powerful is it for us to really believe in something that brings value to people's souls and eternal life now and forever, and we're willing to say, well, that's our tribe. And this is why churches do this. We have to keep pushing out, pushing out. And I worry sometimes. I talk about this with Kenzie. I'm like, am I exhausting you guys? Because I just don't stop. And this is why I will not stop. I didn't see the stop in Jesus. I don't see the stop in Paul. And if Walmart's unwilling to stop, I'm not going to stop. All right? So I want you to hear that we're going to keep pushing outward, keep pushing outward, keep pushing outward. But I also recognize the spiritual care, the development, and the up. And we're going to make sure we're balanced in that. But no, if it ever feels like, man, Mitch's just won't stop, this is why. Because I'm so nervous, not only for our church, but all the American churches, quite frankly, to become fixated inward. Some of us were able to go to the Exponential Conference in Chicago this week. And man, a bunch of churches and church leaders represented that are passionate about getting the message of Jesus out in real, tangible, life-changing ways. These are people, Reformed churches helping Pentecostal churches start, and having Wesleyan churches starting Reformed churches. And, you know, this is the kind of thing I look at them like, man, they get it. I love being around people that are so outward focused, we would put aside our agendas for ourselves or our denomination or our church and say, how can we get them going? And that's what I hope we can be as well for other churches, for our next churches. And I want us to continue to have that fervor and that passion every time we're interacting with somebody, to imagine, am I the voice that they need to hear today? Not your voice, but the voice Jesus gives you because they know you and they trust you. Because yours might be the only voice they will ever hear. This is the outward focus I want us to keep leaning into over and over and over. And so, why us staying outward focused, others, many others, can be upward focused. So there's a practical way of doing that. We've got this, I modified our circle chart a little bit. Does that help? Is that a little less chaotic for you all? No? Oh my gosh. All right. I'm trying to simplify this. All right. This is our flow. This is what I really want us, this is how we're supposed to be outward focused. We have this belief, and it's kind of started by, quite frankly, an American church pattern of we go straight from my circle and invite them into church. We want to draw a big line over and bypass all those steps. And if that happens, hallelujah, great. But how many of your friends that are probably far from Jesus right now, do you think if you asked them tomorrow, do you want to come to church with me next week, would say yes? Probably not a ton. And the ones that would say yes are probably the ones you've developed a relationship with, and they would only do it because they trust you. So that's part of our strategy here, saying, how can we get them into environments that they value? Again, this has to be something they value, something on their priority, something that falls into their purpose for life. And if you were with our vision meeting a few weeks ago at Millwood, that was something you heard about and if you were in the original vision meetings, the 4 big values that unchurched people have is personal development, entertainment, serving others, and what's the other one I'm forgetting here, Kens? Entertainment. But, personal development. I don't know if I said it. But anyways, all these are ultimately meant to lean into those priorities, those values of everybody else. And so we do things, and whether it's organized and we plan an event like we did for the Foster Family Carnival or Acorn, or it's more organic. Your neighbor says, hey, man, I really need some help with the leaves, and you just walk over and do it. That ministry of helping people can move people, and you develop a relationship. That's the little table that you start having conversations and build trust with. And then at that point, maybe, and it's probably after you've really had some significant spiritual conversations with them that they're ready to come to church. Or similar with the Hangouts. So you saw some pictures of the Hangouts from this weekend. The Breithers had a cool one in their neighborhood. They do a great job just connecting with everybody around them. And it's that fun, entertaining space often that those relationships really start growing and stirring, and then it turns into a conversation or conversations down the road, and maybe someday they come. And the huddles, and I know that's not our primary strategy to use huddles for bringing people in, but I'm telling you, like, especially people, if they have real questions about, like, we did that series on science last spring, or something like that. They have some significant questions. Sometimes that huddle is the best format to actually get them thinking about, talking about spiritual matters, and then come in. So this is how we do it. That's the real pragmatic part of it. But the other side of it is that we just have to get over our self-centeredness. And that's actually harder. That's actually giving up the time that we'd spend doing other things that are maybe a bit more self-gratifying and go do things for others. And here's the thing is we had 30 middle schoolers over at seventh graders. 30 seventh graders at our house this weekend. There's nothing in me that wanted to do that. Nothing. Nothing. And still now I just shake my head, what were we thinking? But for me, I just have to say it's not about me. It's not about me. It's not about me. It was our son's birthday, and I want to love him and care for him well. But I really hope we got to talk to a lot of parents to this. I really hope that those parents see, we care about them and their kids in a way that they don't understand, and maybe that develops into a friendship. Maybe it doesn't, and that's okay if it doesn't. But that's what we have to get over, is how do we get over this self-centeredness in our own life and move into outward focus? So that's probably the really the intangible part that's really hard, but the writers of Hebrews says this, and I love this. In Hebrews 13, 15 through 16, he says, through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise. Hear that. Let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise. The fruit of lips that openly profess his name. And do not forget to do good and to share with others. I love that line. Do not forget to do good and share with others. For with such sacrifices, God is pleased. This is a sacrifice that's pleasing to God, to love, do good, and share with others. Share those resources God's given you and love others by doing good for them. And so that's the call. That's Jesus' example. That's the call. That's the mission. So everybody can experience life change and restoration through Jesus. All right, I'm going to shift gears here a little bit. And what you have to understand is this form series where we want you to understand what we are and what we're not. And what you won't see from us with this kind of mentality is you're not going to see from us, and if you do, you can call me on it, where I'm asking you guys to come to a church building 3, 4, 5 days a week. This is how you get your eyes shifted inward too much. And there are effective ways I think you can be outward and have it at the church, but just know I, as much as it kills me sometimes, want you going out. I, as much as I love to see your smiling faces on Sunday, if you're with friends or neighbors or somebody and the option is come to church or continue to hang out with them, I'm going to begrudgingly say, stay with them, right? Because this has to be about them experiencing Jesus, not about us having a few more butts in the seats. We're probably going to be inviting them into activities that aren't very churchy, like going to a brewery and doing fun things like that. And we have to be intentional about when we do those things, to be intentional about developing that relationship. Get a little bit deeper. Remember way back then we talked about next level conversations? Have that next level conversation. Get a little bit deeper. Build a little bit more trust. Maybe open up a spiritual conversation eventually. And it will mean some of these times we're going to just continue to not just go or have parties that we invite other friends into, or hangouts or huddles. But one of the things that was profound to me this week at this conference is they said, there's a guy who came up and talked to him who's an unchurched guy, and this was a pastor. He said, you know, I appreciate that you're always inviting me to come to your things you're doing, but why don't you ever come to the things I'm doing? I'm like, wow, that's so true. Like, even though we're not necessarily trying to focus them all in a church building, our MO sometimes is let's create an event that they might want to come to. What if you developed a relationship so tight that they're starting to invite you into their worlds where you're a little bit more uncomfortable? That would be ideal. This is one of the most valuable things I learned in some of the cross-cultural training that I did. In most other cultures, the biggest compliment you can do is go into their place, not invite them in. And so what would it look like for us to develop relationships in such a way that we're invited in to their space more often and just be listening and be loving them in that place. And ultimately, until we're convinced that their lives will be better with Jesus, you won't convince them. So you have to continue to get to know them well enough to know how to answer the question, why do I need Jesus? And you have to know that about your own self too. Because sometimes it's easy just to play church in the cultures we're used to. But you have to be able to answer yourself, why do I need Jesus now? What about him made my life better now and forever? So I'm going to actually have you guys reflect on that for a second here. But I want to do this. I want to actually step up or move on and ask you guys to make a further commitment than the commitment you've already made to Converge. Not just being here and jumping in with all these crazy things I keep asking you and encouraging you guys to do, but I want you guys to make a commitment out with your resources, specifically your financial resources. And we talked about this for next year. We've got a lot of things, exciting things, hopefully coming in 2022, and we need to know a little bit about what to expect so we can be best stewards of the financial resources we have. And so I shared this with you guys probably a few weeks ago, but I said I want to ask you guys to make a commitment to what you're going to give in 2022. And if you know me well, you know I hate these conversations. I really do. But this is also being a steward and trusting God. Not only trusting God with the resources he's given you, but trusting him in a radical way to say, this feels uncomfortable, but I trust God's going to stretch my faith and expand his kingdom doing it. And what it'll do is it'll set Converge up to budget properly, and our finance team can actually make reasonable plans and not just say, well, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know where the money's going to come from. We'll just wing it. This actually helps us figure that out a little bit. And so I want you guys to spend, I'm giving you till December 5th just to help us, but the sooner the better. Spend some time praying and say, what is God calling me to give in 2022? And if you'd like to add on to there the remainder of 2021, you can as well. And then what happens is you can do this through our Planning Center app, through the giving website, and it'll actually show your progress throughout the week, throughout the year. Every time you give electronically, it'll show where you're at so you can kind of track that. But again, this, I want it to be not about giving to a building. I don't want it to be about giving to anything tangible. I want this to be an expression of your commitment to the vision, to this outward focused living, to this understanding that we cannot stop until every person knows Jesus. And this is what I want to drive you, what I want to stoke the fire of your hearts into giving. Not some pressure by Mitch, not even some guilt-induced, like God won't like me if I don't give, because I don't believe that at all. I want you to test your faith and give, and I want you to be excited about how that's going to live out and carry out the mission, and I want you to see how God blesses that throughout the year. So, take those. You can take some time, fill it out now, take it home. We have to manually enter those, so you can either drop them in that blue bucket in the upcoming weeks, or you can email finances@convergecommunity.org, and you just tell us the amount or whatever, and it gets put in there, and you'll see it. But again, we want you guys to be cheerful givers who are committed to the mission. And hear that, cheerful givers. I hate these conversations, but it's helpful. We need to do this. So I want to do this. I want you guys to just spend a little bit of time praying, and we'll put on a little reflective music in there. There's maybe not. Maybe it won't be reflective. It'll be music. And I want you guys to spend time just praying into these things. Maybe your action today is identifying a person that you just need to make time for in your life to be outward focused. Maybe it's to give radically to this mission at Converge, or maybe it's committing to journal or reflecting on what inspires you to talk about Jesus. Because if you're not inspired to talk about Jesus, you won't. I'm here to tell you. So now go ahead and take some time, pray and reflect, and in a few minutes I'm going to come back, give you guys a kind of closing challenge or benediction here, and then we'll call it. So